The morning the ships arrived was like any other at first. Earth's residents, though weary from years of political upheaval and environmental decay, went about their routines, shuffling between work and home, between caring for families and fighting invisible battles with the systems that control their lives. But within hours the rhythm of the world shattered. At first it was the sky. A line of shifting darkness moved slowly across the horizon, blotting out the sun in patches as it grew. Some people thought it was a storm, others assumed it was a military exercise or perhaps some international experiment. But as the day wore on and the dark shape grew larger, fear began to spread in hushed whispers. By noon there were no more questions, only screams. The first ship touched down in the middle of the Pacific Ocean, sending waves high enough to swallow the coastal cities of Japan. Then came another, this one near the coast of New York City, just beyond the horizon where most of the population had yet to see. It was a slow descent, like something from an old science fiction movie. But the truth of it all was anything but cinematic. A few minutes after the first ships arrived, humanity received their first communication. Not through the airwaves or television screens. There was no announcement, there were no sirens. It was more invasive than that. The voice, soft, otherworldly, slipped into the minds of every human on the planet, as if an invisible force had pressed its fingers against their skulls, and then it spoke. Submit or be erased. It was the only message. It wasn't a broadcast, it wasn't a transmission. It was a mental command, as though each individual had heard it directly in their mind, the words echoing like a distant yet omnipresent whisper. No one knew how to respond. The military, perhaps the first to react with some semblance of defense, was completely overwhelmed. Their radar systems registered nothing. They saw no ships in the air, only the dark patches in the sky. Their weapons were useless, no missiles, no airstrikes, nothing could make it past the invisible field of power that surrounded the ships. And then came the blasts. The sound of energy beams streaking across the sky reverberated with terrifying speed. People couldn't comprehend what they were seeing. Whole sections of major cities were vaporized in seconds, buildings collapsed into dust, entire neighborhoods were turned into craters. No one had time to process the destruction, let alone mount any form of resistance. For the first time in history, humans realized they were not at the top of the food chain. As the invasion continued, days bled into weeks. The invaders made their movements with precision, never rushing, always moving with methodical calm. They didn't seem to care for land. Instead, they systematically targeted humanity's most vital centers. Cities, military bases, and hubs of industry. It wasn't just a strategy. It was a plan to ensure that Earth's civilization was left in tatters. It was only after the initial destruction that survivors began to understand something crucial. The invaders weren't here for Earth's resources. They were here to destroy humanity, utterly. In the midst of the chaos, one woman survived, Commander Olivia Drake. She had been one of the first responders during the initial attacks, part of an elite task force sent to confront whatever had entered their skies. They had been given no information, only orders to fight back and protect the country at all costs. But Olivia had been in command when the first beam of destruction obliterated Washington, D.C., reducing the capital to a smoldering crater. She and her team barely escaped. Olivia had always believed in the fight. She had been a soldier her entire life, climbing through the ranks, believing that humanity could face any threat, whether it came in the form of foreign powers or natural disaster. She had never been one to back down, but nothing had prepared her for this. For days she had been running, moving between the ruins of destroyed cities and forgotten military bunkers. She had witnessed the collapse of her own country and the fall of nations that had once seemed impervious to harm. Communication between survivors was fragmented, and as far as she knew, the world's major powers had crumbled. Every military satellite in orbit was destroyed. The sky was no longer just a battlefield. It was a tomb. It was on the 8th day after the first wave that Olivia found herself in the wreckage of a once vibrant city. There was no official army left to lead. There were only people like her, wounded, tired, frightened, and completely alone. She had spent the last 24 hours scavenging for food and shelter, always looking over her shoulder, half expecting to be killed at any moment by a beam from the sky. But then she saw it. In the middle of the ruins, a ship, one of the invaders' vessels, had landed. It was immense, like a black, oblong shadow stretching against the burnt sky. No sound accompanied its landing, but there was something about its presence that struck Olivia with a strange mix of awe and terror. This wasn't the kind of ship she had expected. It was not a warship in the traditional sense. It was sleek, smooth, almost organic, with jagged edges and strange markings etched into its surface. Instinctively, she drew her sidearm and crept toward it. Every part of her wanted to run, to escape, but something called to her. Curiosity, fear, or perhaps a final, desperate hope to understand what had happened to her world. The ship was unlike anything she had ever seen. It was not constructed like human technology. There were no seams, no doors, no obvious points of entry. Yet there was something unsettlingly familiar about it. A certain symmetry in the way it interacted with the environment. She couldn't put her finger on it, but it didn't feel entirely alien. And then she saw it. A shape moved within the shadows of the ship, and the air around her seemed to hum with an unseen force. A figure emerged, tall and thin, its features hidden beneath a long cloak made of shimmering material. For a moment the two simply stared at each other, neither moving, neither speaking. Then the voice came, not from the figure's mouth, but directly into Olivia's mind. It was a calm, almost apologetic voice. "Do not be afraid," it said. "We are not here to harm you." Olivia's pulse quickened. She took a step back, unsure of whether to flee or try to communicate. Her grip tightened on her gun, but it felt almost pointless in this moment. You're one of them, aren't you?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. "Yes," the voice replied, though the figure never spoke. "I am one of your invaders, but I am not here for the reason you think." Olivia narrowed her eyes. "Why are you here then?" she demanded. "You destroyed everything." The figure hesitated before responding, its form flickering in the dim light as if struggling to find the right words. "We are not the enemy you believe us to be. We are refugees." Olivia's mind raced. Refugees? What does that mean? The voice did not answer immediately. Instead, the figure moved closer until it was within arm's reach. Despite the danger, Olivia found herself unable to move, caught in the intensity of the moment. "We were sent to protect this planet," the voice continued, "not to conquer it, not to destroy it." At those words, Olivia felt a sudden chill crawl down her spine. Protect us? From what? The figure stepped back, and for the first time it lifted its hood, revealing a face that, though humanoid, had an otherworldly pallor. Its eyes were large, dark, and unblinking, too vast, too knowing. "We are not the first to come. You were marked long ago by a greater force, an ancient power that seeks to wipe your civilization from existence." Olivia's breath caught in her throat. The weight of those words struck her harder than the devastation of any warship. She had been fighting against a force that had not been sent to destroy humanity, but to protect it from an even greater evil. Who are you?" she asked, her voice trembling. "I am from a race called the Varn," the figure answered. "We were once your allies, long before your kind ever stepped foot into space. We are the last of our kind, sent to warn you." And so, for the first time, Olivia understood. The invasion wasn't what it seemed. The true enemy had yet to reveal itself, and the fight for Earth's survival was far from over. The real discovery had only just begun. The world had been plunged into chaos. In the aftermath of the destruction, human civilization as it had once existed was a distant memory. The invaders, having come in waves, left nothing behind but ruin. Entire cities turned to ash, and the once thriving metropolises were now mere skeletons of their former selves. The invaders, powerful and cold, had shown no mercy, but Olivia Drake's encounter with one of them had shaken the very foundation of what she believed was true about the invasion. She stood alone now in the wreckage of what had once been New York City, the winds of destruction whistling through empty streets where skyscrapers once towered. There was nothing left of the bustling human activity that had characterized the city, only the remnants of shattered glass and crumbled stone. The familiar landscape, now unrecognizable, felt like a graveyard, and yet, in the midst of the destruction, she felt an uncomfortable stirring within her, an unsettling sense that the battle had just begun. Olivia had been through many battles in her life, but this felt different. The alien, no, the Varn, had claimed to be a refugee. That single word haunted her. She had expected to be facing invaders, conquerors who had come to enslave humanity. But this was something entirely different. The Varn had not only come to fight for their survival, but had arrived with a dire warning. The creature who had spoken to her was unlike any human or alien she had ever encountered. Tall, with a face that could barely be described as humanoid, and eyes dark, reflective, endless. Its very presence radiated an eerie sense of both intelligence and sorrow. Olivia hadn't known whether to trust it or to flee in fear, but she couldn't turn back now. It had told her they weren't the true enemy, and it was clear humanity had been misled about the very nature of the threat that had arrived on their doorstep, and now she had to understand why. The journey to find answers was far from easy. Olivia had no idea where she was going, only that she couldn't stay in the ruins of New York. The Varn had offered her a glimpse of the truth, but the truth alone was not enough to guide her. She needed more information, and for that she had to find others. There were other survivors out there, scattered across the broken world. Some of them would know more. Others might have the courage to fight. The Varn's plea was clear. Humanity's survival depended on their cooperation. But who could she trust? She kept moving, walking through empty streets where only the wind seemed to whisper the remains of what had once been. There were no signs of life, no sounds of distant voices or activity. The silence was suffocating, overwhelming. Even the birds and animals had vanished, leaving behind a desolate, oppressive void. It wasn't until the third day of her solitary trek that she found something, a flicker of movement in the distance. At first, she thought it was just another mirage brought on by the heat of the scorched land. But then a figure stepped into the broken street, a woman, dirty and bruised, her eyes hollow with the remnants of fear and exhaustion. She wore the faded remnants of a military uniform, her once pristine gear now torn and stained. Olivia instinctively reached for her weapon, her heart pounding. The woman looked as if she might be a threat, but as their eyes locked, there was a shared understanding, a moment of recognition. Neither one of them spoke for a long time, simply standing there as if waiting for the other to make the first move. "You're alive," the woman finally whispered, her voice cracking from disuse. "And so are you," Olivia replied, lowering her weapon, but still on edge. "What's left of humanity?" The woman's eyes fell to the ground. She shook her head, wiping away the remnants of a tear. "We've been scattered. The ships came for us, for all of us. The ones who fought back, the ones who tried to resist. They're gone." Olivia's mind raced. "But you're still here. You're one of the resistance, right? Do you know who's behind this?" The woman gave a bitter laugh, then turned and began to walk slowly, gesturing for Olivia to follow her. "Resistance? You think we're still fighting a war? What's left to resist, Commander? We were lied to. We were told they came to take over, to destroy us. But the truth, well, it's much worse than that." Olivia moved swiftly to catch up. She needed answers, and this woman might have them. "You've seen it too, haven't you?" the woman continued, her voice gaining strength. "The ships, the Varn, they came to fight the real enemy. But they didn't tell us that part, did they? They didn't tell us about the other force that's coming, the one that will make the Varn look like saints." "Who is it?" Olivia asked, her voice barely above a whisper. The woman's gaze grew dark, haunted. She stopped in her tracks and turned to face Olivia fully. "I don't know, but it's here. It was coming for Earth long before the Varn ever arrived." A sickening realization began to form in Olivia's gut. If the Varn weren't the true invaders, if they weren't the ones humanity needed to fight, then who or what could be worse than them? The woman continued, her voice trembling. "The Varn were our allies once. They were sent to warn us, protect us from something much older. The Varn are refugees, survivors of a species far older than anything we know. But they're enemies. They're not just conquerors, they're hunters." Olivia's eyes widened in shock. "Hunters?" "Yes," the woman confirmed. "The true invaders are not after territory, not after resources. They are after us, the humans. Not because we're weak, not because we're valuable, but because we're part of something they can't control. We're a test." "A test?" Olivia repeated, her mind struggling to process the enormity of the statement. The woman nodded gravely. "We're being studied. The Varn tried to warn us, but we didn't listen. We didn't understand. And now we're facing an enemy that we cannot defeat with weapons or military might. We're fighting for our very existence, not just as a species, but as a part of something far larger, something far more dangerous." Olivia stared at the woman, processing her words. She could feel the weight of it all pressing down on her, suffocating her, like the crumbling buildings around them. She had known that humanity was in danger, but this was an entirely new scale of horror. "Where do we go from here?" Olivia asked, her voice steady despite the storm raging inside her. "How do we fight back?" "We don't fight them," the woman said softly, shaking her head. "We survive. We survive long enough to understand why we were chosen, long enough to find a way to defeat the true enemy before it's too late." Olivia stood still for a moment, her thoughts whirling. She had joined the fight to protect humanity, to preserve the world she had known, to give future generations a chance at survival. Now, everything had changed. There were no clear enemies anymore, no simple battles to win. Humanity wasn't just up against invaders. They were fighting something that might be far older and more intelligent than anything they had ever imagined. It was no longer just a fight for Earth. It was a fight for the future of existence itself. Over the next few days, Olivia and the woman, whose name was Sarah, made their way deeper into the remnants of the old world, searching for any survivors who might have knowledge of the true threat that loomed over Earth. Each encounter revealed more pieces of the puzzle, but nothing that made the situation any clearer. The Varn had warned them that the true enemy was coming, but even the Varn were not certain who or what had arrived. All they knew was that it was a force older than time itself, a force that viewed humanity as an experiment, something to be tested and ultimately consumed. Olivia couldn't shake the feeling that the enemy was already among them, watching, waiting. She had no way of knowing when it would strike or what form it would take, but one thing was clear. Humanity had been on the brink of extinction for far longer than anyone realized. The world had changed, irrevocably. The tall towers of human achievement now lay in ruins, crumbled and broken under the wrath of invaders, whose true motives remained as elusive as the very nature of the destruction itself. Olivia Drakey had seen her share of conflict, wars, political unrest, rebellions, but nothing could have prepared her for this. The strange alien ships, the mysterious invaders called the Varn, and the shadow of something far darker and more ancient that loomed above it all. But now, as she trudged through the remains of civilization with Sarah, her only companion, Olivia realized that every step they took brought them closer to an uncomfortable truth. The fight for Earth was not just a battle of human survival against external invaders. It was a war for humanity's very soul. As Olivia and Sarah ventured deeper into the crumbling remnants of the city, their journey was one of uncertainty, punctuated by the sound of the wind howling through the skeletal remains of what had once been a bustling metropolis. The streets were eerily quiet, save for the occasional distant rumble of another alien ship passing overhead. Though none of the ships had landed recently, it felt as if they were always on the precipice of something terrible, with each day that passed adding weight to the oppressive silence around them. They came across the ruins of a military bunker early the next morning. The thick metal doors had been torn open by some unknown force, the interior of the once secure facility now a chaotic, ghostly echo of its former self. The walls were lined with abandoned weapons and broken equipment, the remnants of a failed defense effort. As Olivia stepped cautiously into the bunker, she instinctively reached for her sidearm. "Stay alert," she whispered to Sarah, who nodded but said nothing, her expression distant and lost. She had seen too much, more than anyone should ever have to. Olivia could only imagine what had gone through her mind as the world collapsed around them. Together, they walked deeper into the wreckage, exploring the lower levels of the bunker, where old military data terminals and files had been discarded. "We need to find answers," Olivia said as she flipped open a charred file cabinet. The stench of burned paper filled the air. She rifled through the pages, desperately seeking any shred of intelligence about the Varn or the enemies they were supposed to be preparing for. But it was Sarah who found something. Olivia quickly crossed the room to see what Sarah had discovered. It was a holographic display projector, partially destroyed but still functional. As Olivia approached, the display flickered to life, casting a dim blue light across the room. The image was distorted, but the message was clear. Humanity has failed its final test. The harvest is imminent. Prepare for consumption. The words seemed to hang in the air, slowly sinking into the fabric of Olivia's mind. The harvest? Consumed? What did this mean? Before Olivia could voice her thoughts, Sarah spoke again, her voice tinged with dread. The harvest, it's not just a metaphor, it's real. Who is this from? Olivia demanded, her throat dry. It's a message, Sarah said, her voice low, from the Varn. The ones who came to warn us. They tried to help, but humanity, failed. We didn't understand what was coming. This harvest, it's what the Varn came to prevent. The true enemy, the one they were fleeing from, they've arrived. Olivia felt the blood drain from her face. She had heard the word harvest before, but she had thought it to be some sort of symbolic term used to describe the aliens' war. To think it meant something more, something terrifying, was nearly impossible to fathom. Suddenly the building shuddered. A deep rumbling vibration filled the air as the walls groaned in protest. Olivia tensed, her hand flying to the sidearm holstered at her waist. There was a loud thud, followed by the unmistakable sound of something heavy moving in the distance. "Get down," Olivia hissed, grabbing Sarah by the arm and yanking her toward the nearest shadowed corner of the bunker. She peered around the corner, holding her breath. Through the cracked, smoke-filled windows, Olivia caught her first glimpse of what had been causing the vibrations. A massive ship, unlike any the Varn had shown her, loomed on the horizon, its silhouette framed against the darkened sky. It was a behemoth, an ancient, jagged thing, its surface pulsating with an eerie, unnatural light. "That's them," Sarah whispered hoarsely. "The harvesters." Olivia's eyes widened. This was the true enemy, the ancient force the Varn had warned them about, and now they were here. With an overwhelming sense of dread, Olivia knew that the world they had known, the one they had tried to fight for, was gone. It was only a matter of time before the harvesters descended upon them and humanity would be faced with its final test. They had no choice but to act quickly. In the days that followed, Olivia and Sarah gathered other survivors, scattered remnants of humanity who were still clinging to life in the decimated cities and hidden underground bunkers. They found engineers, scientists, soldiers, people who could still fight, still try to make sense of the madness that had consumed their planet. Together they formed a small resistance, one determined to understand the true nature of the harvesters and to find a way to survive. But they were running out of time. Olivia, however, remained haunted by the discovery. The harvesters were not mere invaders. They were a consuming force. The Varn had been right. Humanity had been a test. For what purpose, though, was still unclear. In an abandoned laboratory beneath the ruins of a forgotten city, Olivia found something that might hold the key to understanding the harvester's true purpose. Among the wreckage, in a locked, sealed chamber, she discovered a set of detailed schematics. Ancient star maps, diagrams of human DNA, and extensive notes in an alien language that none of them could decipher. But there was one symbol that appeared over and over again, a sigil that looked eerily familiar. It was the same symbol that had appeared in the holographic message, the one that read, "The harvest is imminent." When Sarah saw it, her face paled. That's the symbol of the old ones," she murmured. "The beings who created the harvesters, the ones who seek to consume everything they touch. They are the ultimate predators. They do not conquer, they devour." It hit Olivia like a bolt of lightning. She said, her voice sharp with realization. "We're not just under attack. We're being harvested. Not for our resources, but for something far darker. They're using us as food, an experiment. We were never meant to survive this." The full weight of this new revelation was almost too much to bear. The harvesters were not a force seeking power or control. They were seeking extinction, not just for humanity, but for everything. They were predators, hunting the most intelligent species across galaxies, and Earth was next on their list. Days turned into weeks as Olivia and the survivors worked tirelessly to decode the ancient texts, the star maps, and the cryptic symbols that now held the key to humanity's survival. They knew they needed to understand the harvesters, to find a way to prevent the full scale of the disaster that was coming. Yet with every day that passed, they learned something new and more terrifying. The Varn, the refugees, had tried to protect Earth from these invaders, but their efforts had been limited, and now, with the harvesters closing in, Olivia and her resistance had no choice but to risk everything. They had to find a way to turn the tables. "We can't fight them head-on," Olivia said one night as she sat with Sarah in their makeshift command center. "We've seen the ships, we've felt their power, but we might still have a chance if we understand how they think, if we can get into their minds." Sarah nodded slowly, a dark glint in her eyes. "The key is in their biology, their ancient origins. If we can figure out how to disrupt the bond they share with the old ones, maybe we can find a way to stop them." Olivia clenched her fists. She didn't have much hope left, but she couldn't allow herself to quit, not yet. "We've got to take the fight to them, or we'll never see tomorrow." It was time for humanity's final stand. With the knowledge they had gathered and the alliances they'd forged, Olivia and her ragtag group of survivors began to piece together a plan, not to fight the harvesters in a traditional sense, but to infiltrate their ships and disable the very source of their power. The resistance had a single shot at survival. The battle for Earth was not just a war against invaders. It was a war for the future of existence itself. And for Olivia Drakey, it was a chance to rewrite humanity's destiny, not as conquerors, but as survivors. But as she prepared for the final assault, she couldn't shake the feeling that the discovery of the harvesters was just the beginning. Because in this universe nothing was ever what it seemed, and the true test had yet to come.